But our next presentation is actually going to be given by Dr. Jane Lynch. She is section chief at San Antonio. She and I have known each other several years going back through work with the Today trial and type 2 diabetes, but she's actually going to step in and talk a little bit about type 1 diabetes today, and a natural transition there with the bionic pancreas, because that is going to be the title of her talk.
With all of our work with the Today study, and my only disclosure is one that's really unrelated to our work with the bionic pancreas, which is the work we're doing right now with some therapies for type 2. The objectives of this talk, which this talk was supposed to be given by Dr. Rabab Jaffrey, who came to us with experience in the studies I'll be covering that led up to our pivotal trial, include highlighting how alpha and beta cells have dysfunction that contribute to type 1 diabetes, the burden of care that is associated with managing type 1 diabetes, the advancements in technology, which you've just heard, and our experience with the pivotal trial in children with bionic pancreas, and where we're at now. So with type 1 diabetes, we know that it's not just insulin. We really have beta cells that are deficient in insulin, as well as dysregulation of the alpha cells that contribute to managing glycemic control. And on your left is the very complex diagram showing that the islets with alpha, beta, and delta cells all are regulated in a very complex physiology, so that not just glucose, but also amino acids and gut incretins influence how these hormones are secreted from the pancreatic islet cell. But also on your right, the interactions of crosstalk between the alpha and beta cell that allow for enhanced insulin secretion to glucose by the crosstalk regulation with glucagon and GLP-1 receptors on the beta cell. So this is not an easy thing to mimic with our insulin therapies. Here's where usual care steps in, where over the past 100 years, we've advanced in ways to measure glucose, to count carbs, to make dosing decisions, and to have better delivery of insulin. And then that cycle repeats throughout the day. And we teach the skills that you need to do each of these steps. And over the last 100 years, we've come a long way from, believe it or not, where I date back to DCCT, we had intensive care consisting of basal bolus insulin with fighting to get blood sugar strips for 4 to 6 times a day for blood sugars. So basal bolus insulin has advanced in many ways. We now have all types of different insulin profiles, ranging from Fias to the very long-acting forms of basal insulin. We have ways to deliver them as a pump for basal, and we have different injector devices. So this is all amazing in how far it's come, but we have a long way to go. If we overtreat or miscalculate or exercise or get sick, then we have to really use glucagon as a rescue. And that's really how we've thought of it, almost like an EpiPen for low blood sugar. And the use of glucagon now can be intranasal or shots. But again, that's really been, as I was raised in diabetes, thought of as your last resort rescue if you needed to use it. So sick day rules, we know physiology changes with a fever or illness or vomiting. And when we see the kids coming into the emergency room, we're testing for ketones and hydrating them. And all of that throws off their usual insulin needs. And with all this, and remember these statistics, it's really the shockingly low minority of patients that achieve an A1C of less than 7. And the studies done, these are 2020, 2019, 2015. I'd like to think things are a little better with our technology, but really we're estimating that only 13 to 14% of preteens and teens achieve an A1C of less than 7%. Maybe your clinic is a lot better, but we know that these are challenging, and we know that our adult endocrine colleagues want nothing to do with them till they're over age 18. They're very happy for us to keep these kids in our clinics. And then it does improve over time, maybe with maturity, maybe with routine days, maybe with technology, that still goes up, but not really beyond the upper 20s. So insulin was discovered 100 years ago. We've come a long way in many of our technologies, and we've had this real burst of technology in the last 5 years that's been so exciting. And I think we're really struggling with, do we really want the mom's iPhone taped to the wall in the hospital with it charging to the plug so we can see the CGM? Do we, who can afford it? What are inequities and disparities for care? And how do we work with families to meet them at what they're able to do? We've come a long way in the wearable devices. These are really fun to see, but we still have a long way to go. The hybrid closed loop system that was just being talked about are amazing. I think we're all just so thrilled to be able to finally get our hands on some of these pumps and see these technology advancements where you don't have to rely on glucagon. You can actually have a pump and sensor that backs off on insulin to prevent hypoglycemia. That was a big breakthrough, at least for me. And we set up the hybrid closed loop pumps with either a fixed or suggested basal insulin, which the pump can then override as it needs to, a suggested correction factor for most of them still. And then we ask the families to count the carbohydrates and alert the pump before eating, preferably, to allow it to give insulin for the meal. And sometimes it gives the insulin with almost like a dual wave equivalent of insulin with a pre-dose and then using the CGM. And you have to go back at different intervals, see how that's working and make adjustments on those pumps. It does require carbohydrate counting and initiation of those correction boluses, especially with meals, and looking at the parameters. And each one's a little different, but aren't we thrilled to have these coming out? This is not, nor is Bionic Pancreas, an artificial pancreas. So an artificial pancreas would be defined as not a transplant, not an islet replacement, but a device that would be completely closed looped, as in the sensor would alert to the device to produce or provide insulin and glucagon, get the glycemic control managed and in circles. But the question is, how does it know when you're eating? How does it know when the food is coming in? And so that's been the kind of compromise with the islet. So we had the opportunity to be part of the islet, Beta Bionics islet pivotal trial over the last 2 years through COVID, through Stormageddon in San Antonio, through a lot of challenges. And it's exceeded, I would say it's exceeded our expectations for the initial study of 18 kids. So at our site and then at the multi-center sites. So truly, this is a device that you gingerly put on your patient and enter their weight and walk away. And it's a device that quickly has automated AI to get to know that person's needs at different times of day with different types of meals. And they are asked to have a kind of a normal day for 3 days. But of course, our second kid went home and ate birthday cake for his dad's birthday at midnight, ice cream at 2 a.m., slept till 11 a.m. We were watching the Dexcom saying, oh my God, what's going on? And it reinforcing that it really needs those first 3 to 4 days to learn that child or that adult or that patient with diabetes. So we tried to ask them just to have some normal days at first so that this device could learn their physiology, and it adapts autonomously and continuously. The only setting that you have the option to set is, do you want usual, lower, or higher than the target blood sugar? because we have some kids that just really tend to drop at night. So you actually do have that ability, but we would start them at usual target and no carb counting, but you do announce meals. You announce, I'm eating breakfast, lunch, or dinner, as in the times you'd normally eat them, at a usual breakfast size, more for me or less than me. So that's the decision you make. So if you're eating breakfast, it's breakfast time. You say, I'm entering my meal and I'm going to have more than usual or less than usual. That's it. And then from there, the correction doses are automated and you're not to try and trick out your device at all. And really, you don't even have the ability to do so. And this is the device. One we worked with for Pivotal was insulin only. We didn't have the glucagon cartridge in that, but it is, there are several studies that I'll show you where it's delivering not only insulin, but also long-acting dasiglucagon that comes in a cartridge with dual infusion sets now. And so the difference is you're now doing this iteration of the cycle 288 times a day if you're using the G6. And this really enables this device to start to learn who you are and figure out within, it looked like 3 to 4 days, what your needs were. The algorithm is based on the glucose measurement using a sensor, and then whether you're using insulin or insulin plus glucagon, and the delivery, and it's got different, it's a very complicated algorithm for your insulin needs. And like I said, it seemed to take about 4 days for it to figure out the kids. It had a, oh, yeah, I didn't think that was very loud. It had a predictive control algorithm, meaning it would give a proportionate mini bolus of glucagon for the lows on the bihormonal, which was not the one we were working with. And this ability to not have to be carb counting, but to have an awareness of carbs, which these kids did coming in, and to just judge small, medium, large for me. And interestingly, part of ours was a follow-up where we let it run afterwards, where the Dexcom readings were offline to see how it would do once it knew you. And it did relatively well. And we have that data that's been published. But again, our strong opinion was kids should always be online, because the risk for hypoglycemia, as you know, can occur with exercise and some unpredictable patterns with growth hormone in the morning. And so having just insulin is not going to solve the problem. And in fact, with the suspension of insulin delivery in some of our current pumps, that's not always enough to prevent a hypoglycemia, which is where it's exciting to think about the mini boluses of glucagon, which would allow you then to even fine tune a little more and have a little more narrow range of what you're shooting for your goal. So I'm going to run through some of these studies, of which Dr. Jaffrey was involved. And this began in 2013. And I remember hearing about this at PES with them taking kids at Jocelyn and Clara Barton camp and putting them on this early version of this device for 5 days of usual care and 5 days of the Bionic Pancreas. And it was a crossover study. They were very brave. I've worked at Clara Barton camp. Those kids are super active. So they had 24-hour surveillance, and it was probably a good environment for kids to do this study. And what they found was really encouraging. They had the lower mean average blood sugars over 5 days, 167 versus 137, and a lower proportion of lows. And I've worked at Clara Barton camp. We have a lot of lows at that camp. Those kids get really active. They come from all over. And with that, then there was less carbohydrate rescue for the kids while they were at camp. And absolutely no events in the 5 days for the 16 kids in each group for ketosis, and no severe hypoglycemia. So that was the start of this study. This device was also assessed with some validated questionnaires. Jill Benchel, who worked with Barbara Anderson, has been very instrumental in looking at some validated type 1 scores for fear of hypoglycemia, burden of care, and diabetes distress. And those consistently in these studies do improve. And then in a multi-center home use, so as you see these incrementally more brave studies with dual glucagon and insulin, in adults, they found that, again, glycemic control improved. The percent of patients with A1Cs of less than 7 went from 41% to 92%. These were very motivated patients. These are patients who wanted to do the study. And again, at the expense of 1/3 less hypo events and very small amounts of glucagon. Again, here's the next step: usual care versus insulin only versus bionic pancreas, again, showing incremental improvements in all the parameters that we just discussed. And with that, we were approved to do a multi-center 13-week crossover randomized study in type 1 diabetes. And one of the points that was made was, who gets this technology, right? This isn't very accessible in families who, in our case, we recruited who couldn't afford a cell phone and had never used CGM. We brought them in, handed them a cell phone, taught them how to use their cell phone, taught them how to use their Dexcom, and 2 weeks later, turned them loose on the whole device. And I will, spoiler alert, say we more than met our goals for a representative study population. We wanted it to be the 20% or less that had an A1C of less than 7. We wanted to have no upper limit on A1C. We wanted to have diversity for minority groups, hence San Antonio. And I took them seriously. On these kids were so thrilled to have a phone for many of my patients. And we wanted to have 1/3 of them on MDI and 1/3 of them on head-to-head state-of-the-art hybrid closed loop, and then the rest in the middle. And the study took place with 160. So after trying to recruit for type 2 studies all these years, this was a breeze. So our, I have my notes, but our percent of patients enrolled were 453 screened with 440 enrolled. And we met our 50-50 for kids of the preteens and teens, and they were randomized 2-to-1 to start on bionic pancreas. And then the group that started on usual care flipped to bionic pancreas. And the adults had an extra arm where they used FIASP, where the patients on bolus insulin, we kept their bolus insulin the same. So we were allowed to use whatever they were using, so that would not bias the study. And then our primary outcomes were comparing the kids and adults combined, ages 6 through 80s, on their results for head-to-head usual care versus bionic pancreas. And then we had secondary outcomes. So this was not specific to, I mean, this is a wide age range, which is very unique for these type of studies. And as I said, we did meet our goals of 26% self-identified minority, very diverse income and education. And we had, most patients were using CGM. These are in 16 centers where we do diabetes care. So 89% were familiar with some form of CGM. And then we had MDI, some with and some without CGM, accounting for 26% with and 8 additional without. They loved the CGM. They loved having a Dexcom. And then we had the fanciest of fancy closed loops for the upper third. And we did the hierarchical outcomes analysis, meaning that you do the statistical analysis for differences in hemoglobin A1C. If that's significant, you go on to number 2. How many lows? If that's significant, mean CGM. So we got down to these 4 analyses, and I'll show you the results, where we did achieve a significant difference in 13 weeks of hemoglobin A1C decreasing. So in this usual care, the kids and adults did about the same. There wasn't really a difference. And on the Bionic Pancreas, there was a statistically significant drop in A1C. So then we could go to the next one. That was even a little more significant in the kids. And because we had no upper range for A1C, and because this study would attract naturally people who are well controlled or really wanting to be in a study like this, the patients with an A1C starting at less than 7, that 20%, there wasn't a huge change because how much lower can you go? But in the patients who were out in an A1C range of 8 to 9 or greater, there was a very dramatic improvement in 13 weeks in their A1C. And this shows you in blue the range for the Bionic Pancreas for daytime, nighttime versus usual care, which was significantly improved across the 24 hours. And then for secondary outcomes, we went back and looked at the range of CGM and the standard deviations of the glucose. And I thought I had a better slide with that. And we made it all the way down to number 8, which was the CGM glucose of less than 70 meeting statistically significant difference. And because both were relatively low, they weren't statistically different, which was a good thing. And these papers I have cited at the end of my talk with the articles. So right now, the hope is to gear up for a longer study with a pivotal trial in kids and adults using the insulin and glucagon. The glucagon is dasiglucagon, which is a long-acting suspension in pre-filled cartridges and for mini boluses. And to see if we could do this during COVID and during the grid melting down and during the grid melting down and burning out our chargers for the pump and the kids dropping what was not the most durable, we would call and say, we need another pump, their kids. Yes, send us 2. We'll probably need it. You know, they drop in the shower, they drop on the steps at school. If we could do it under those circumstances, I think this is pretty encouraging. And I think lastly, I don't want to downplay all of the other technology that's come along. This is really just standing on each other's shoulders as we move forward. So I am really excited about the technology that we have to offer. I really think these studies have not in the past done a great job of having diversity in the studies, having the age range be this wide, having the income be this wide, having the minority percent and the reflective of population percent of A1Cs enrolled, which is really important because we are trying to translate what works best to whom. And we had teenagers at the end who would procrastinate. I can't make it Tuesday for my last visit. Maybe that a week later, would that work for you? And can you buy these cartridges on the market? And, you know, we had to really kind of cajole them to come back in at the end of the study because they were saying, oh my gosh, I forgot. I didn't have to do all that work. And that was really a consistent theme among the teenagers and among more so the parents of this really felt great to be able to just sit back and let this take charge. And I think most of our pumps are going in that direction, but it really needs to be offered to all our kids. So questions, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch. Let me get up here really quickly and try to get here. Looks like we may have had one earlier.
The earlier question of who benefits most. Where does our bias come from of, well, if you work really hard and get in control, then we'll consider you for a pump. With the pumps we had in the past, where if they didn't change their infusion set, yeah, they were in DKA. So I think that was valid. But I do think maybe we showed this amazing improvement in the high A1C group for this study.
So I think that was the question, and it was at the end of Dr. Adhikari's, but it actually speaks very well to what Dr. Lynch was saying. And how do we approach pursuing closed pump technology in your very poorly controlled patients? And do you feel this is a tool that can be beneficial for them, or do they have criteria for your very poorly controlled patients? So I think that is exactly what Dr. Lynch was speaking to. I don't see another in the, well, actually, I think we may have just got another chat there. Okay.
Yeah, we stacked the odds. It's a question of,
we'll read the comment real quick because I don't know that it's so different.
I love how the team stacked the odds negatively on purpose and still saw great performance. Thanks for emphasizing that. So that was a gamble. And then we were nail biting a little during it, that we sent these kids off, some of them just with families that we were teaching during COVID, distance, Zoom, and we had to go to the IRB. We had 38 amendments to our IRB. I'm still in forgiveness mode, but it wasn't an easy cohort on purpose.
Yeah. Were there any other questions in the room? Okay, Dr. Stillman, let me get back here.
Sorry, I'm hiding behind the column here, but question, I guess the question is for both of you all. So
Come back up.
with all the new technology that's coming along, how do you see that the practice of diabetes care is going to change?
Oh, well, so there's this hope in rural wherever that you could be a family practice doctor, have a newly diagnosed diabetic, and put this on them. That scares me to death. There's so much you need to know about your health and management. But on the other hand, how wonderful would that be for getting started as you do education? I think it's just going to get better. We do need the inpatient to catch up with us.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing it's tempting for me to say is the two data points I think we have to confront are, one, we're not growing PD endos at any appreciable rate, and we haven't been for decades. So the volume of us is not going to increase. And I'm sure everybody saw the very recent prognostications in terms of the actual number of people with diabetes and what that's predicted to do in the next 30, 40 years. So we need technology to get simpler. We need our therapeutics to get simpler. We need to partner with our primary care partners better because we don't have the capacity. I mean, it'd be great for everybody to have a one-on-one relationship with a pediatric endocrinologist who they see 6 times a year. But that's not happening, not realistically. So we have to confront that.
And this might help us grow some PD endos because this is really a technology that can be done remotely. Where you're looking at their download, you're looking at their Dexcom, you're not having to adjust the pump, you're not having to talk a mom through how to go into the menu of their child's pump in the middle of the night to avoid the ER. So I really hope we can move forward in a way that is supporting us and providing good care.
I think that's great. I just, there's one concern I have. I mean, all technology is great and it's a wonderful tool, but I mean, there has to be somebody that is the knower of knowledge, and can really, understand pumps, because I mean, I find and with the first talk, talking about having CGM in the hospital and things like that, I find that, medical people that are not in the know on endocrinology, a lot of times they just want to go up. It's technology is going to take care of it. But the reality, and you and I know that, yeah, that can happen, but there are times when things can go horribly wrong and bad, and you need someone that knows the technology and knows how to troubleshoot with the family and with medical staff to intervene.
Okay. Just a second, coming your way, Dr. Sebastian.
Thank you. First off, it's very exciting content, really, really cool research. I come to medicine from a background of design, and so I just always think about user interaction. And this is more of a physical design question. Are the cartridges containing, now that we're worried about two hormones, are they in any way shaped or contoured differently to ensure that we're not?
Oh, yeah,
accidentally-
very much. And you can't put one in the other hole. Yeah. Very basic question, but true.
Talk about things that could go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Really quickly, and I'm sorry if I missed it. I know that the FIASP from the Bionic Pancreas trial, the FIASP was only in the adults.
Well, we actually did an extended run in the kids too.
Okay.
I didn't include that in this data, but it works similarly. There's a little, it worked similarly. It was a little better. I mean, these are all increments, a little better, a little better. Where we had the biggest issue were infusion sets. And we were only approved to use one infusion set. That's not my favorite infusion set. And we were teaching MDI patients who'd never used a sensor how to put on in 2 weeks, a Dexcom for 2 weeks, a sensor on the day they got their teaching, a pump for how it functioned and how to change out cartridges. So our weak link was the infusion set issues that we had, and they were just families not used to using infusion sets often.
Oh, coming, Dr. Sproul, coming.
With all of the new stuff that's coming, how do you all think, or how do we start as a group advocating for payers to cover all of this
Us
sort of
and the
us,
device.
yes, please,
Both.
thank you, but
Both.
then also, X, Y, and Z, when it's
So the DCCT, as I came out of fellowship in Boston, I got to be an investigator for the older kids in the DCCT. Huge component of that study was looking at reimbursement. That was back in the day where you couldn't get strips, or, I mean, it was crazy what they wouldn't provide. And by showing outcomes for cost, you could argue your retinopathy, that you could show the statistics for improved glycemic control affecting long-term costs. That's only going to affect for Medicaid, Medicare, the payers that have the long-term care concerns. But I think that's always your smartest argument, that it's going to save money in the long run. I hope that'll work.
And we've seen progress, right? Like, as discouraged as we all are, the reality is that there has been progress even in the last couple of years with regards to CMS used to require this many hurdles to get a CGM. CMS doesn't control Medicaid, but Medicaid follows behind often, and those hurdles have gotten fewer. And I think as we think about expanding CGM technology to type 2s, more so than we do now, that potentially brings new talking points that we can leverage to, hey, we need to diminish these barriers and get them paid for easier.
And as the prices come down and you compare it against the cost of strips and one hospitalization, we need to be mindful to collect that data and use those arguments.
Very good points. All right. Any others in the room? I'm going to walk this way, check the chat one more time since I missed that one last time. So sorry about that.
No, I don't think there's anything else here.
Looks like anything else. Here's my, oops, so sorry. What? Oh, from Rebecca. How is sick day or pump malfunction breakdown handled for those who are only used for the algorithm? So had it extra correction doses for ketones, how was that handled within the Bionic?
Oh, if they were sick and had a fever and ketones, actually we'd ask them to hydrate, but a lot of times you're getting ketones either because you're dehydrated or because you've had some rising blood sugars with inadequate insulin. So we did not have any DKA or the ketone instances we had were related to infusion sets. I think with any pump, it's similar, right? I mean.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of differences, and the answer to what do you do for sick days for kids on AIDs is going to vary by algorithm. Because I'll share a vignette. For example, I had a child who has type 1 diabetes who was diagnosed with a brain tumor recently. So they are now going through chemo every few weeks in the hospital, and they're on an OP5. And being new to all of this, the first time we admitted him to the hospital while he was on steroids, we said, you know what? Let's let you stay on the OP5 and see if it can keep up with your needs. And actually the system did great at keeping up with his hyperglycemia needs. But what I didn't anticipate is then he went home off steroids, and my fellows are nodding because they were the ones who took these phone calls. As soon as it learned that you need this much insulin, it's when he stopped his steroids and went home that he was crashing low the next few days off his steroids. So it did great with keeping up with all the hyperglycemia associated with not illness, but with something else that was causing him to be hyperglycemic. But because of that, we've decided that, you know what, when he comes in, he's going to come off his OP5 because its memory is so short term that it can keep up with your needs, but then it doesn't know that, hey, you don't need that anymore. So we take him off the OP5 when he's on steroids now. And I don't know that that's the right answer for other systems, but that was my approach to OP5 and hyperglycemia.
And the Bionic Pancreas we've had a pilot in CFRD, so cystic fibrosis related diabetes with the steroids. And that might be an instance where you say, I'm setting my target post hospitalization as a higher target, and then I'm going to bring it back down to usual. So I think thinking that through and using that logic is important. That same thing with our leukemia inductions and some of our high dose transplant patients. Those are all going to be really challenging.
I think, speaking directly to the question there was, when you were doing that in your protocol on iLet, what was there additional insulin in the protocol, or was the protocol, like you were saying, just change the pump and let it go?
Yeah. And it did involve new school orders. That was probably one of the bigger, I was like, we were ready to go. And we said, where are the school orders? And they said, school orders. So working with school nurses who were phenomenal working with us. And with the new pumps. I mean, I give them so much credit they want what's best for the kids.
All right. Well, please help me thank Dr. Adhikari and Dr. Lynch. Wonderful session.